Stay tuned for the Joan Quinn Profiles. Joan served the state of California as a member on the Arts Council and on the Film Commission. She was formerly on the Architectural Commission and fulfilled 2 terms on the Fine Arts Commission for the city of Beverly Hills. As an editor for Andy Warhol's Interview magazine, Condé Nast Publications, and the Hearst Corporation, Joan covered the world of fashion, the mysteries of food, the excitement of theater, and the international art scene. She continues to find people who are on the cutting edge of their professions. Here's Joan Agajanian Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. We're taping here at the Hollywood Museum in the historic Max Factor building. And our guests are sculptor Peter Shelton and singer Kim Recor. Award-winning artist Peter Shelton has been honored several times with grants from the National Endowment of the Arts. He has a Bachelor of Arts from Pomona College, an MFA from UCLA, and he studied at the Hobart School of Welding in Troy, Ohio. Peter was one of LACMA's Young Talent recipients way back when the LA County Museum was giving awards for these young talented artists in Los Angeles. So you were born in Troy, Ohio, and you went back there to welding school. What was that?
Well, after I got out of undergraduate school, I was trying to figure out what to do with myself, and I was actually trying to avoid going to graduate school. I felt like my undergraduate education, while very stimulating, was very heavily influenced by a kind of very academic attitude in the arts, which is prevailing today.
Was that from Pomona? Was that the reason?
That was from Pomona. I mean, at Pomona I started off as a pre-med major, but I ended up and going through anthropology and theater, ended up as an art major.
But you know, that's really speaks to your work, doesn't it? I think it does.
Oh, for sure.
I didn't know the medical, the pre-med, and
right.
Anthropology?
Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, go on.
So I got out of undergraduate school, and I was sort of determined to do something other than go to graduate school, maybe not be a teacher, which was predicted by all my teachers, the fate that I had, and I was trying to defy that fate. So I decided I'd go back to Troy, where I was born, and I was always very interested in they have a big welding school there and a big welding company called Hobart Brothers, and all of my Mennonite and historical, all my German relatives from the 18th and 19th century in Ohio had all been blacksmiths or fabricators or something.
Oh, is that right?
So I decided that would be an alternative to being a college teacher, and so I went to work in Dow Chemical up in Midland, Michigan, and I worked in Dayton, Ohio.
So you were going to be a welder? I mean, you actually went to school to
Oh,
learn welding?
no, and I was certified, and yeah, it was an intensive program, and I did it, and I worked for a couple years, and I did it long enough where I realized that I didn't necessarily want to turn 30 doing that. So I came back to California.
But then how did your art come about? How did you describe your art? Were you welding? Were you painting?
Well,
what were you doing?
in college I had some very powerful teachers in an artist named Maury Baden and James Terrell and Guy Williams and David Gray and Michael Brewster when he first started teaching. So I had these very strong characters.
But aesthetic.
Yeah.
I mean, like really.
Well, I mean, my senior project at Pomona was really kind of a painting project, really, but not really painting with brushes. It was kind of a process kind of work.
Yeah, because it was different.
And then I got to California, I opened up a studio, and I sort of felt like I just didn't want to carry on with what I did as an undergraduate. So I basically had to sort of rebuild a whole way of approaching my work. And initially it came out of a lot of drawings and notebooks, and I started doing some fabricated works, and that led me to a kind of big, almost architectural kind of scale for my work, things you could walk around in and move around in.
So how do you describe your work then? You call it sculpture?
Yes, and I definitely call it sculpture. I think it's sort of polymorphous. I think that some of the artists that I really admired sort of were hybrid kinds of artists, so people like Terrell or Kienholz or Bruce Nauman all sort of defied a certain kind of characterization of what they did. It was as much theater and performance as it was painting and sculpture. So
I think it's interesting, though, because you did take theater, and that was some of your background, and you talked about being in school and having it be so academic, and here these teachers that you're talking about were very academic. I mean, they were high thinkers, weren't they?
Yeah, I'm not a slouch in this area, but I just felt like that, one of the things that was really powerful for me about a lot of those artists in LA is that a lot of the stuff that they were working on related to the body. And so,
yes, and there you were from pre-med besides.
So it made a lot of sense for me to think about, and it made a lot of sense for me in general to think about the idea that you may be very cerebral about the work, but at some point the substance and the experience of the work as you felt it in the body was as important as your sort of brain was about it. So, and the artists that I really admired, I think, did that. So that led me to, and they all were polymorphous, so I love the idea that you could kind of enter a work physically.
And then call it anything you want, really.
And it would be anything I want.
Isn't that
sure.
right?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think we have this one picture here. I want to. Well, this is kind of about a polymorphic shape.
Oh yeah, and I think that the idea that the sculpture is less about an object and more about your kind of moving around and think of you. Usually they're hollow.
This is an installation, right?
This is an exhibition that I did at LA Louvre Gallery 3 years ago.
And what are these pieces made from?
The one on the right they're both made out of composite materials, which is basically kind of fiberglass and other kinds of materials.
So they're not really heavy.
They're not heavy, they're quite light. And the one on the right is actually gold-leafed. It's called Fat Angel, and it's I've been very interested in these kind of toroid forms, the torus forms that are you see in nature, both celestially and also in biology.
But another exhibition at LA Louvre, you showed these. Is this the right way?
Yeah, that's right.
You showed these pieces. Lots of long limbs, lots of arms and legs.
Well, this started off as a kind of sample of forms in my studio, and it ended up being 188 separate parts, and it's sort of the ultimate Mr. Potato Head, It's just, in the sense that I called it God's pipes, lowercase, is this idea of this sort of primal set of building blocks from which our vascular system or our forms as body would be made.
So this is interior, and I was thinking exterior limbs, but this is another one of those shapes.
Right. Here's the
this
top.
Way.
There you go.
We're going to do the top. This is another one of those shapes that people. You look at it and you wonder what it is.
Right.
But now, after talking to you and hearing the background, you know it comes from some part of our body.
Well, or some part of our psychic body.
Or a psychic, right.
I call that dog star, and I think of that as a kind of, it's actually 8 feet tall, so it's quite large.
And heavy?
Very heavy in this case because it's bronze, but it starts off as something that seems micro within us, but then the reference to a kind of astronomical form, like a meteor or some other kind of form, is my reference to dog star, partly because it looks almost like two dogs, upon each other, but also it's a reference to the star Sirius, which is called the dog star. So.
But also, were the forms that you used for your commission at the LA Police Administration Building these kind of forms?
Well, the ones at the Police Administration Building is that one called Six Beasts and Two Monkeys were kind of beasts of
Animals,
burdens,
right?
kind of animal forms, at least very abstract, but they had sort of vestigial kind of arms and legs.
But the other thing we talked about the Police Administration Building, which was a big commission. You had commissions from the state of California and the Indianapolis Public Library and the SeaTac Airport.
Right.
And how do you get those commissions?
I've actually done not that many commissions.
But you've done a lot.
Well, I've done 4 really large commissions that have, where usually I don't do so many because usually they're kind of interested in you creating something to their program.
That's what I was going to ask you
and
about.
Usually,
this is Indianapolis?
That's Indianapolis.
Okay.
And so I've done very few because most of the time they want me to sort of check in my own ideas. But in this case, there's 4 that I've done, big ones I've done in the last few years. I was able to create what I thought was some part and parcel of my work, but also being very thoughtful about the circumstance I was in.
So this was the front.
Yeah, that's the front of a 1917 vintage Greek Revival building.
Gorgeous
with
building.
It's a Paul Cray building. He designed the DIA building in Indianapolis.
This
in
was on
Detroit.
This
is on one of the plinths. This is called Thin Man. And on the other one is this form I call Little Bird, which is a big bronze, it's 11 feet in diameter, bronze toroid again, that has a little sparrow that's perched on one edge of it.
Oh my gosh. And so do you have to go through the process? Who approves it, and how does it happen?
Well, in that case, Paul Craig built the building, never appointed the sculpture, never appointed the pedestals with sculpture. Very much part of the Greek revival thing was that you'd have, the building itself was almost a kind of backdrop for sculpture. So years later, almost 100 years later, the Library Foundation and community people decided that they wanted to have a competition for artists to propose something, and that's the way that came about.
And this one?
That's a project I did in the airport in Seattle called Clouds and Clunkers.
Okay, so how would you get a commission at the airport? And how would you get the public to approve it? That's the problem with public art, I think. The public never wants to accept it unless they've been educated.
Well, this was the Port of Seattle. I was invited by about 6, 7 other artists. We did interviews. I made them a proposal. But I mean, longshoremen, head of the Longshoremen's Union was part of the committee that chose it. I mean, there were a lot of people that were very excited about it.
And they're strong. They're strong images, right?
Well, yeah. The idea was to make nine patterns that I would make, very light versions that hung overhead that would be cloud-like, although kind of body-like as well.
Yeah.
And then down below be the same set of forms cast in iron, so you'd have this contrast of weight between light and heavy. And in fact, we clad the floor in steel and created this sort of steel pedestal for the clunkers, so that between the light ceiling, the sort of the solarium ceiling, and the heavy floor, you would get this contrast between these two forms. And even though you recognize them as the same forms, one seemed translucent and light, the other one was heavy.
So you live in Los Angeles, you live in Venice or in Los Angeles, and you're working in Seattle, Tacoma. How do you get this work up there, and how much do you do up there, and what's the process?
The process there, for example, was to create the original, I think maybe 9 patterns. We ended up choosing, 13 patterns. I ended up choosing 9. The fiberglass patterns we made in the studio, those were used to make the cloud forms. We made all those in my studio. Then we used those patterns that we'd made to make the cloud forms. We sent them off to an iron foundry where they did the casting.
So they were cast somewhere else and then delivered
cast up in
there?
Washington State. Then there's a fabricator that I work with often up there who, who helped not only the installation but saw to the final fabrication.
How long is that whole process?
That project was probably 4 or 5 years.
Oh, it was?
And the reason was in the middle of that 9/11 happened.
Ah, I see.
And so they had approved the proposal, and then 9/11 happened, and they had to pick up the pieces. I mean,
well, then how long does it take the fabricator to make it, and how long does it take to install it? And
in my shop, what I call the clouds probably took us the better part of 9 months intensively, and the casting was again another 6, 8 months. And
so it's a long process.
It's a long process.
And how often are you involved in it? Every day?
Yeah. Well, there's a certain amount of the fabrication, like the fiberglass work, that somebody else can do. But I was involved. I made all the shapes. I modeled those. Then we had those enlarged, and then I further refined those. So I'm pretty.
And then when you go to the foundry, how often do you have to be there?
Depends on how well they do. If they're on top of their game, I don't have to go very often. In this case, it was an industrial foundry, not used to doing fine art work, and so I spent a lot of time there.
So you do have to go. You have to watch every minute of everything. We had such a great discussion with you. I love this piece. It's gorgeous. Is it heavy?
No, it's a tensile structure too. It's a big skin of cloth that's over a steel frame, and the skin is saturated with shellac, so it gives it this
it's beautiful.
And it again, it's one of those things that sort of seems small in the sense that it's like an insect or something.
But it's
and that's me at a younger age, right?
Yeah, but this is a person next to this big piece.
But then on the other hand, it sort of shrinks the space because it's almost like some kind of celestial form that's kind of landed in the room.
It's beautiful. You talk about yourself in here as being a young person. Now that you're getting older, has your work changed at all?
Well, yeah, I suppose it has. I'm not quite as involved with things that you could enter as I did before. It's definitely evolved. It's become like any kind of garden you plant. At first it seems very precious, each thing, and then at some point it has its own ecology, and so I find myself responding to what's sort of growing up there naturally without my having to to force it so much. So I think it's just, I find that the work becomes more layered, and I find ways to think about works that I thought I was done with because I think about them in a different scale or different materials. So
I was going to say, are the materials changing?
Materials are changing, yes, and I've probably gotten more sophisticated about how to use them. So yeah, the materials change a bit.
So you know what you do.
As best you can, yeah.
Thank you, Peter.
Well, thank you for having me, Joe.
Thanks very much. Thanks for watching this part of the show. We'll be right back with singer-songwriter Kim Recor. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome back to the Joan Quinn Profiles. We're taping at the Hollywood Museum, and our guest is singer, songwriter, musician, blogger, vintage expert, Kim Recor, who was born and raised in Germany and came to Colorado as a teenager. She went, among other schools, to Whittier College, and she's lived in San Francisco and LA. How did you get the wanderlust? How were you like traveling so much?
I've kind of always had it. When I was young, I always went on lots of trips with my parents throughout Europe, and yeah, this is actually the longest I've ever stayed put. I've been here in LA for 4 years, and before that, I was moving every 2 years from San Francisco to New York.
What were you doing on those travels?
Mostly music.
In each city, like in San Francisco?
Yeah, I think my life has always really evolved around music and creating with friends and new friends.
Did you find new friends when you go to each place?
Yeah, I think that's like the nice thing about being in a music scene. It's really easy to connect with people over something like music.
And you've been writing a blog. Is it only about music?
No, I actually stopped writing my blog a couple years ago. It was like more of a lifestyle journal blog, kind of detailing my travels and what I was doing.
And why did you stop writing it?
Kind of got really busy with music. I kind of just stopped having the time to update it as much as I wanted to, and I still write a lot, but I don't put most of my writing online now.
Now, when you're writing, is it songs mostly?
Yeah, now when I write, it's mostly songs. I do short stories and poetry and.
Were your songs indicative of your travels? Were you using your travels as basic for your songs?
Most of my songs are kind of just about what's happening to me. So a lot of it had to do with where I was at. Like if you listen to the songs I wrote in New York, they're a lot darker and a little bit more intense than maybe the ones I was writing in San Francisco. And I don't know, my songs are really indicative of the people that I'm around, because a lot of my songs are about relationships and friendships. And
what do you call the kind of music that you sing or produce or are a part of?
It's funny because I'm in a lot of different projects, but my main project, which is called Dreamings, is a kind of like dark. It's like a dark pop rock. Kind of has like a little bit of The Cure going on. It's like a mix and match of all my favorite things.
Do you write on an instrument?
Yes, I write on guitar and I write on keyboard. I'm kind of proficient at everything a little bit, but I think guitar and keyboard is the best.
Did it start in Germany? Did this musical background start there? Was anyone in your family musical?
Not really. My mom was a dancer and my dad was a computer engineer.
Oh, did they sing? Did they play instruments?
No, my mom has really good rhythm, and she kind of played the guitar a little bit, but not very much. So I actually didn't even really, I thought I was going to be an actress until I was about 16 or 17, and then I came to LA actually over the summers to audition stuff, and I just wasn't really.
You didn't want to do that?
I was like, this isn't really my favorite kind of thing to do, and then I started hanging out with a bunch, it always happens, you hang out with a guy who's a musician, he teaches you something on the guitar, and then for me.
Was that the beginning?
Yeah, it was like, that really was.
You'd never taken piano lessons as a child or any musical instrument?
I sang in theater. I did musical theater, so it was all part of like acting.
Well, when you go to write a song, what comes first? The lyrics, the music?
Depends. I've written a lot of songs around lyrics where I'll be going, through something and I'll write down the words. But recently, it's actually been, I've started off with the music and then listened to the music and kind of sing what it evokes.
And what do you use a keyboard or do you use the guitar for the music, or do you just hear it in your head?
It just depends on what I'm around. This last album that I wrote, the album that I'm currently finishing, which is my solo album for Dreamings, was written mostly on keyboards.
One of the songs I listened to was Girl in the Attic, which to me reminded me of your vintage part, you know, like what's she doing in the attic? She's looking for vintage things. So tell me a little bit about that song.
So I wrote that song with an old band of mine called Black Flamingo.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Black Flamingo.
Black Flamingo, when I first moved to LA, I moved here with 2 of my best friends, and we moved into this 3-bedroom house. And within probably like 6 months, we kind of turned into this weird little commune, and there was 10 of us living there.
Is that right? Where was it? In Hollywood?
It's in Frogtown, which is like Echo Park area. Yeah. And so out of those 10 people, 6 of us were in a band together.
You're kidding.
And we practiced in the house, and so that was kind of Black Flamingo.
That was Black. What kind of music was that at that point?
It started off kind of very like dark California surf pop, and now it's gotten way more gothy and heavy, really almost like My Bloody Valentine-ish. Like
Are you still doing Black Flamingo?
We were on hiatus for 1.5 years, and we just recently started just recording music for fun again.
I think it's funny that you say, you know, it's very California. They're dark. You're talking about being dark, but you're talking about surfing and all the stuff that goes on here.
Well, I think that LA in particular has these like 2 very interesting sides. You have this like super like surfy, healthy lifestyle, but then there's also something kind of really dark and romantic and mysterious about LA, you know, like the underbelly. So I think that's why I love LA, because it has kind of both things. I mean, I feel like I'm pretty much split in half. I have this dark side and this light side, and LA has that too. So
when you were riding in this house, was there an attic? Is that what you?
No, there wasn't even an attic. It's really funny because my friend Ammo, who's the other singer in the band, came up with the lyrics for that song, and we were really obsessed with ghosts at the time, and we didn't really have an attic, but we had this space that was above the house that was just empty and probably full of asbestos, and we were always hearing things, and so she was like, there's probably like somebody living in the attic.
Yeah, the girl in the attic.
Yeah, the girl
was up there. But we did talk about vintage. You're a vintage, I'm calling you an expert, because you had a storefront too with vintage.
Yeah, I've always collected, I mean, I've been thrifting since I was 12. My dad would give me an allowance, and instead of going to the mall and spending it all in one store, I'd go to like Goodwill or Salvation Army and just like come back with like the craziest
bags.
clothes, you know? And like I look back now and some of the stuff was kind of questionable that I was wearing, but a lot of it was really beautiful, and I just like love the craftsmanship of like old clothing. So
did your store have a name?
It was called Positive Greater Than Negative, but it was actually just a symbol. It was like a plus sign greater than negative. So that was the.
And how did you fill it? I mean, here you are. You used to go to Goodwill and to thrift stores, but here you are selling the stuff. How did you fill it?
Well, I started off with an online store, and and so I was a little bit of like a vintage hoarder, and it got to the point where my roommates were like, you should probably not have this much stuff. And so I was like, oh, okay, I'll start selling on Etsy. And at the time, Etsy was still kind of just a new thing. Not that many people were selling, and I did really well. And then the opportunity came for me to have a store, and I was like, oh.
So where did you get the stuff? Was it your own stuff?
Yeah, it was just stuff that I had.
I mean, you could fill a store with everything that you had.
I had so much stuff, and I did for a long time. I don't have that much stuff anymore, but at that point, I just had boxes and boxes. I had a whole basement full of just vintage that I'd been collecting.
Well, now your Black Flamingo is coming back, but you're in another group, Bavaria.
Yeah.
Do we call it a group?
Yeah, I guess it's
like
it's
two
people. It's a duo.
It's a duo.
Yeah.
What is it? What's Bavaria? Where'd you get the name?
So John Tejada, who is my collaborator in that project, him and I have known each other for 10 years. We've been working together just very casually, and we both kind of were raised in the Bavarian region.
Oh, you were? He is too?
Yeah.
With a Tejada name like that?
Yeah, I think it's from his mom. It's not that his dad is I believe Austrian. So we were like, what should we call ourselves? Bavaria. We both, it's one of those it was really funny because I feel like usually coming up with a band name is what always takes forever, but it was really like, oh, let's say that.
Does he play an instrument too?
He is multifaceted, but for Bavaria, he just did all the programming, which is basically just synths. But he plays drums and guitar. He's one of those.
Is he very artistically
talented.
Does he produce it too, though?
He produces
Yeah,
it. Yeah,
that's
that's what he's most known for. Is his DJing, his production. He's really,
And then what kind of songs are on that? And did you write them all for Bavaria?
yeah, all the yeah, I wrote all the lyrics and the melodies for it, and it's like very experimental, dark. It's very sad. It was kind of like exercising the darker moments in life. For me.
What are some of the titles?
Let's see. We break through.
We break through.
We break through. There's one song called Everywhere. Delicate Destroyer.
Does he sing with you?
No, he just.
Oh, he doesn't. So you're just on alone.
Yeah, just me alone.
When I know you do a lot of shoots, photographic shoots. Do you style yourself with your vintage stuff?
Yeah, I usually style myself. Sometimes other people style me, but I'm pretty particular about what I like to wear and how I like to present myself.
You're all covered up now, but you have an armful of tattoos,
I do.
right? Where'd you get those? Can we see them or not?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I could.
Can you take your jacket off?
I could, but then I have this.
Oh, then you have a sweater. But they're all from here down, and what are they?
It's a girl, and underneath it is a quote from The Last Unicorn, which is one of my favorite books. And yeah, actually, I have a lot of tattoos. I went through a phase from probably 21 until 24 where I was just like, I just want to cover myself in tattoos. Now I'm calmed down.
You're okay? Where'd you have them done?
All over. The thing was, when I lived in San Francisco, I had a lot of friends who were tattoo artists, which can be really dangerous because they'll just be like, oh.
You never stop?
Do you want to just come in and get your arm done? And you're like, yeah, sure, you know, where I think most people, you know, are like saving money to get big pieces. So for me, I was just like, oh, my friend will do it. And why not? You know, just draw on my arm. It's fine. But I love it because it's just little pieces. Like it's like a roadmap of my life. You know, I can remember exactly how I was feeling.
Do you continue now?
I haven't gotten a tattoo in a long. I'm not gonna say never, but it's been about 4 years since I've gotten a tattoo.
So you're not ready for it yet.
Yeah.
Well, we are so happy that you came on to talk to us today,
yeah,
and we thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
And you keep writing to JAQUINN1@AOL.com, and we'll see you next time on the Joan Quinn Profiles.